Hey, everybody, welcome to this edition of And Just One More Thing. You may have noticed that a lot of our episodes focus on the county's response to mental illness and substance use disorders. And frankly, that's because it's a lot of the work that we do, and it's one of the most frequently asked about areas of work. Uh, a piece that's both kind of interesting and frustrating to me is that often the issues of homelessness and mental illness and substance use disorders get interconnected in ways to suggest that people are homeless because of these illnesses, and somehow there's a mental health response to ending their homeless situation. So, to be clear, housing is a solution to homelessness, but mental health treatment is certainly a response to mental illness. And our county runs so many different, both inpatient and outpatient programs. And my guest that you're going to hear from in a few minutes today uh, is a division director over our outpatient treatment services, of which there are many. And I think the point that I want to make even before the conversation is that being treated in the community, being an patient, outpatient patient, um, means that you still have all of your rights to live and move and walk and be where you want to be. You are simply receiving treatment in the community as any of us would go to see an outpatient doctor. Treatment is not synonymous with being confined to a particular place. But hang on, we got more for you. Thanks for staying with me. I am going to be speaking in just a moment with Sabry Ramirez, who works in the county's Behavioral Health Services Department and is a division director in our Care Court program. And I'm excited to hear from him, and I hope you are too. I am back with Sabry Ramirez, who is going to talk with me today about Care Court. But first, I've asked him to introduce himself because your title is impossibly long.
Yes, it is.
And I want to honor your full title.
I appreciate it. Yeah, so my title is Division Director. I work for the Behavioral Health Services Department under the older adult system of care.
Okay.
And then my division specifically is called Cross Systems Initiatives, which often, like I mentioned earlier, means nothing to a lot of people. What my division does is that it houses all of our intensive outpatient services in our county. So some programs that people might be familiar with would be FSP, which stands for Full Service Partnership.
Uh-huh.
Some people might be familiar with ACT, which stands for Assertive Community Treatment. Some people might be familiar with AOT, which is Assisted Outpatient Treatment. And then now we also implemented, the care pathway into Care Court. And then CARE stands for Community Assistance, Recovery, and Empowerment Act.
Thank you. We will focus on Care Court today, but the key thing that I just heard you say is that all of these treatments are outpatient.
Yes.
So being part of Care Court or another program doesn't mean that you are housed either voluntarily or involuntarily somewhere.
Correct.
Okay.
And I think that's one big misconception that some people might have, that the CARE Act created like a new program or that it created a new level of treatment, which it did not, right? So I think that's why it's important to know all the other services that are available,
Mhm.
because what the CARE Act did is it created a pathway into already existing services. So people who might go through the Care Court process are going to end up either at an FSP program, at an ACT program, or an AOT program.
So care is not a service in itself.
Correct.
It's a court process?
Yes.
So tell me how someone would become connected to the Care Court process.
Sure. So right now, the way most people could do it, but not the way, it's the way to do it, would be to file a petition through court.
Who can file a petition?
So several people, first responders, family members, The simple way of thinking about it is anyone who may have knowledge of someone who
Mm-hmm.
they believe is suffering from a severe mental illness, who is either putting others in danger, putting themselves in danger, or potentially severely decompensating, and that person doesn't want help. That's like a very key there. That person doesn't believe that they need help.
Okay.
They don't want the help. They don't want to voluntarily engage. They could then go petition with the court,
Okay.
give a history of the client's background, and then a judge would then make a decision of whether the client or respondent in that case
Mm-hmm.
meets criteria or not
Criteria for any of those outpatient treatments?
for the care court process.
For the care court. So a judge looks at the petition and might say you're not even eligible for the care court process?
That's possible, yes.
And what is the profile of someone who would be eligible for
Sure.
the care court process?
So in order to be eligible for the care court process, you have to be an adult, so 18 and up.
Okay.
In our county, you have to be a Santa Clara County resident, so we can't petition people who are outside of our county.
Okay.
They have to have a severe mental illness, but specifically, this is the small window, they have to have a psychotic spectrum disorder, which for clinicians, that might mean something. For people who are not clinicians, the simplest way I can describe that is it's people that have delusions, hallucinations, psychotic breaks. So common diagnosis would be like schizophrenia,
Okay.
schizoaffective disorder, things like that.
Is that diagnosis made during the petition process?
The person who's petitioning,
Mm-hmm.
so that could be a first responder, it could be a family member,
Okay.
they have to prove that when they file with court.
That person has one of those diagnoses.
That they meet all the criteria. Correct.
Okay. And so if a law enforcement officer is picking someone from the street, I don't mean picking,
they've been called,
so it's repeated calls. It's not a first time, I see this person, they seem to be in distress or crisis, I'm going to file a petition.
They could. I think where someone might struggle, though, is that they would have a hard time proving the diagnosis, right? So like the story, or like the little analogy I like to show people is like, let's say which actually I do have a 24-year-old son. Let's say I thought my son needed services, right? But my son didn't want them. He didn't think he needed services. He didn't want the services. But me as his father, I'm noticing he's not eating. He's talking to himself. He's maybe hearing voices. He's threatened to maybe hurt some of my family members. Okay, well, I want this person to go to care court. In order to file a petition with court, though, I have to prove everything I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
So the easiest way to do that would be to have access to his medical records, which I wouldn't.
No, he's an adult.
Because he's an adult. And he's also protected, right? His information is protected. So it would be really hard for me to have that information. Some people have that because sometimes maybe before their family member kind of started decompensating, maybe they did sign an ROI. Some family members do have access to that information, so then they can file a petition. But for the most part, it's a really tough thing to do, to prove and to have a clinical document or clinical records to prove that this person has a history of mental illness and that specific diagnosis.
Medical records are always private. How would you?
You could, in theory, you could sign an ROI. So, for example, I could sign an ROI to my mother saying, I want my mother to have access to my records.
Got it.
And then she could have it.
Okay.
But in this scenario, most of the people
jump up a little bit. Let's jump up a little bit. Someone is eligible. They are now in the care court process. What does that mean?
What that means is that then initially the judge or a care judge has acknowledged or agreed that this person meets criteria. There are care court hearings established. That referral is then made to our department, to Behavioral Health Services Department. We do an evaluation to make sure that the client also meets the criteria.
Okay.
If everything lines up, client meets criteria, that person will then very likely be mandated to treatment.
Okay.
And there's two ways you can be mandated to treatment. One is to do a care agreement, which is pretty much a client after the hearing saying, okay, I do need help. Or a care plan, which is the client after the hearing saying, I still don't think I need services. I still don't believe I need treatment, but the court is mandating it.
And if the court mandates treatment, where does the person go for the treatment?
It would depend on their level of need.
Okay.
So they could end up at, like I mentioned earlier, at one of our FSP programs. They could end up in an ACT program, or they could end up in an AOT program. And it all will depend on the complexity of their case, their history with mental illness, cultural aspects are taken into consideration.
Mhm.
So all of that leads into a referral.
So the treatment, do they go to a specific place? This is where you go to get FSP treatment. This is where you go to get AOT treatment.
So in our county, all of our intensive outpatient services are contracted out.
Mhm.
So we have, for example, for FSP, currently I believe we have about 7, it might be 8, apologies for that, providers, and they're all contracted providers. So it could land in any one of those providers.
So this is a person who doesn't want treatment, if we're in the care plan,
Mhm.
doesn't believe they need it,
Mhm.
very likely are unable to take care of themselves sufficiently to get to treatment.
Mhm.
How does that actually get, I hate to use the word enforced, but I feel like that's the right word.
Sure. In theory, the care court process would be the one who is enforcing that. So it would be the judge, it would be the public defender, it would be our county council through a court process. I think something that's really important to know is that the court process, the care court process, is a civil court process. It's not a criminal court process.
So if you don't comply with your mandated treatment, what's the what happens?
The client's lack of engagement in treatment could be used during a conservatorship process. But because it is a civil court process, if they don't engage, no one goes to jail. There are no jail times. There are no fines established. It's more that client's lack of engagement in history could be used. And I say could because there's pieces of the conservatorship process could be used in that process to strengthen the reason or the resolve to potentially have that person be conserved.
So getting through the care court process, getting mandated treatment is not equivalent to a conservatorship.
It is not.
What is I know we're running a little bit low on time, but it's so interesting, and I hope that our audience will stay with us a few extra minutes as well, because I just think this is really important. What is the difference between mandated to treatment and being conserved?
The biggest difference is that when you're mandated to treatment through care court, you still have your rights. So you still, so even though it's mandated, it technically still falls under the voluntary side of treatment. Versus once you're conserved, you kind of lose some of those rights because then now you have a conservator. Pretty much, they're the ones that are consenting for you for medication, treatment services, other services that you might be eligible for. So it's really that line of, I have my rights, I no longer have some of those rights.
And if you're conserved, does that mean that you go into a locked facility, or can you be under a conservatorship and still get outpatient treatment?
Both. So oftentimes people who are conserved can be in an inpatient setting,
but they don't have to be.
But they don't have to be, and they can also be in an outpatient setting.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this. What may I have missed, and what do you think folks need to understand? Because this is a very specific, narrow, and stringent process. There's a lot of kind of public misunderstanding or lower level of understanding that somehow this program is a magic bullet to compel people, particularly who are unsheltered homeless, to compel them into treatment and into some facility that they must stay in.
Right. No, I would say that hopefully this dispelled that a little bit, that being part of the care court process is not an automatic solution to homelessness. Homelessness or being unsheltered is not one of the criteria. And actually, so far, it's a 50-50 split. Yeah,
Interesting.
50%
Okay.
of our referrals have been unhoused. The
Mm-hmm.
other 50 are housed.
Okay.
So it's not a major part of the criteria. Uh, I think the thing I also like to add is that because our county and our department was able to acknowledge and identify that this process may not be easy for a lot of folks. Like I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
you have to be able to prove the diagnosis, you have to
Right.
be able to prove the medical history. That is why our county created our outreach and engagement side of this process, where someone might believe they have a family member or a neighbor, or if they're a first responder, someone that they've met out in the community who they believe might meet the care process,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have the background. They can make a referral to our outreach team.
Mm-hmm.
We will do the investigation. We will make sure that people meet the
Ah,
criteria. And if they do, we can petition them.
interesting. So the petition doesn't have to be the only first step. In
Right.
fact, and are you successful often at engaging people through that outreach to voluntarily accept services
We
and not
are.
even have to get to the petition?
We are. So far, as an example, we have received overall, since the inception of Care Court,
Mm-hmm.
62 outreach referrals, which are
Okay.
separated into petitions. Out of those 62 outreach referrals, we've been able to connect 30 people voluntarily into services. So for now, that's a 50% success rate, which is better and pretty high compared given the population.
Right.
And we still have about 20 to 21 people in active outreach. So those other 20 could potentially
Maybe
still make
there.
it to services.
Sabry, thank you so much. I feel like I have a much better understanding. I think you just have a terrific speaking and explaining style
Thank
that
you.
I appreciate so much. And thank you for the work that you do. And
Of
thank you
course.
for being part of And Just One More Thing.
Sure.
I'll be back. So, just one more thing today. I'm going to share a little bit of info about my origin story with my very sweet husband, Steve Ellenberg. Steve grew up in San Jose, specifically in Willow Glen. He went to Buxton, Markham, which is now Willow Glen Junior High, and Willow Glen High School. Then he went to Cal, and then he managed to leave the state briefly to work in Washington, D.C., and then to go to law school at Columbia University in New York, which is where I come into the picture. We met in law school. I was a year behind him, and he was clear and very inappropriately early, in my opinion, that he was moving back to San Jose after he graduated. And if I was interested in him, I needed to be interested in the city. And I will tell you that I had barely heard of San Jose other than the Dionne Warwick song. I was very much an East Coast girl, and my idea of California was hippies in Berkeley, movie stars in LA, and maybe something in between. Uh, but he was worth the move. We came here, we got married in 1990 when Steve graduated from law school. We stayed for one more year until I graduated. And then we moved to San Jose and began our life here together. And he was right. San Jose is a fantastic city. It has been a great place to raise a family. It has been a place where it has become really not only very much my home, but a place where I am very much devoted to the success both in the moment and in the future. And on May 27th, we will be celebrating our 35th wedding anniversary. So that's just one more thing.